Hi everyone, Miss K here, and I'm going to go over some important vocabulary terms that you need to know from the water cycle. To help you learn these terms, take out your notebooks and turn to the next blank page. At the top, write water cycle vocabulary. As we define the following terms, I want you to write the words and their definitions down in your notebook or journal. Let's get started. So hopefully you see the PowerPoint, the water cycle vocabulary on your screens. The first term we're going to look at is water cycle. Write down water cycle in your notebook. What is the water cycle? From the Brain Pop video, you should have a pretty good idea of what the water cycle is. Here's a picture of the water cycle in action. Now let's look at the definition. The water cycle is the continuous movement of water on, above, or below the surface of the earth. Take a minute to copy this definition next to the word in your notebook. You can use this definition or write it in words that make sense to you. For example, I might write that it is the path that all water follows as it moves around the earth in different states. Pause the video if you need to. The next term we're going to look at is evaporation. Go ahead and skip a line in your notebook and write evaporation. Think about that word for a second and what it could mean. Here's a picture of what evaporation looks like in the water cycle. And here's another picture of evaporation as you may have encountered it. Now let's define it. Evaporation is the process in which a source of heat like the sun causes water to rise and change from a liquid to a gas called water vapor. Pause the video and write this definition in your journal. Remember, you can use your own words in your notes. I could say, evaporation is when water turns from a liquid form into gas form. Now let's examine the meaning of condensation. Skip a line in your journal and write down condensation. Have you heard of or seen condensation before? Let's look at what condensation looks like in our daily lives. Here's some water droplets stuck to glass. That's an example of condensation. Another one that you may have seen is on the outside of a cup or a bottle of cold water. Those water droplets are condensation. Now let's look at it in relation to the water cycle. These arrows indicate that there was warm air down lower and cold air up higher. That's how those clouds are formed. There must have been water vapor before because they condensed into clouds. So, condensation is the process in which water vapor in the air cools down and changes back into liquid water. This is how clouds are formed. Go ahead and pause the video to copy this definition or make your own definition in your notebook. Okay, skip a line and write down precipitation in your notebook. Does this word sound familiar? Take a second to think about what it means. Now let's look at some images of precipitation. I noticed that there are different forms of precipitation. Let's see what the definition says. Precipitation is when the water droplets in clouds get too heavy to stay in the atmosphere, so they fall in the form of rain, sleet, hail, or snow. Pause the video and write this down in your journal using the definition provided or your own words. The last word we're going to talk about today is collection. Skip a line in your journal and write down collection. This word has a few different meanings. Think about what it could mean in relation to the water cycle. Now let's look at an image of collection. Do you have an idea of what definition we're going to use? Let's find out. Collection is what happens when water falls from the clouds back to the earth in land or water. It may run over the soil and collect into oceans, lakes, or rivers, but most will absorb into the ground and become part of the groundwater. Take a minute to copy this definition or make your own in your journal. Okay. Now that we've defined these important vocabulary terms, let's do an activity to help us remember these words. Turn the page in your notebook and get out your crayons because we're going to draw these words as pictures. You can draw with your pencil or crayons, whatever makes you happy. I'm going to use my pencil for now, and maybe I'll go back and color my pictures later. Do you remember the first term we defined? It was water cycle. Draw a picture of the water cycle. Here's my picture that I started drawing earlier. I've already added some color to it, but it's still fairly simple. I'm going to label mine to help me remember the steps in the water cycle. 2. This arrow is when evaporation happens. And you can see how I've drawn little squiggles here that represent the water changing from liquid into water vapor. This arrow is when condensation happens. And you can see the lines that I've drawn that kind of look like wind. That is the cold air that causes the water vapor to condense back into liquid droplets. This arrow is the precipitation phase. Kind of running out of room here, but that's okay. I made this cloud darker because it helps me remember that precipitation happens when clouds get too heavy to hold all the water in the air. And this last arrow is when the collection phase happens. I drew a river down this mountain to remind me that collection can happen in many different ways, like rolling down the soil, absorbing in the ground, or falling directly into the ocean. Finally, I'm going to label this whole picture as the water cycle. Pause the video if you would like more time to finish your drawing. Remember, this is to help you learn and understand these terms. Okay, now let's draw a picture of evaporation. There's lots of ways we can do this. Since we're talking about the water cycle, I think I'm going to draw the ocean and have arrows showing that water is rising into the atmosphere, changing into gas form or water vapor because of the heat from the sun. Now, I'm no artist, so I'm going to label some parts of this picture to help me remember what's happening. That's my sun. I'm going to write water vapor here. Maybe I'll draw a little squiggly circle around it. You can draw something like this or another form of evaporation if it helps you remember better. But don't forget to label your picture. Pause the video if you'd like more time to complete your drawing of evaporation. Now let's draw a picture of what condensation looks like. I know that in the water cycle, condensation is when cool air meets water vapor and the clouds are formed from water droplets. So I'm going to draw some little squiggles showing that there is water vapor in the air. Then I'm going to draw some wind and label it cool air because cool air is needed for condensation to happen. Now I'm going to add some circles that represent water droplets as they are changing back into liquid and condensing or coming closer together from the cool air. I'm going to make some of them farther away and some of them closer together so that I can remember what's happening. And now a cloud, because that's what happens to the water droplets in condensation. Clouds are formed. Your drawing may look different than mine. You could draw a cup of ice water that is sweating from condensation. Just be sure to label what word your picture is defining. So I'm going to write condensation. Pause the video if you need more time before we move on. Okay, 3 down, 2 to go. This one is an easy one. Let's draw precipitation. I'm just going to draw a raining cloud because that's what I first think of when I hear precipitation. You might want to draw a different picture. Maybe yours will have snow, sleet, or hail instead of rain. Just remember to write precipitation by your drawing. I'm going to write precipitation. Oops. I forgot an I after that second P. That's better. Go ahead and take the time you need to draw your picture. Last but not least, we have collection. There are many possibilities as to what you can draw for this phase. To keep it simple, I'm just going to have some land over here with water running down it back into the ocean. And remember, it doesn't have to be pretty as long as it helps you remember the words that we're defining. You could have something different. Maybe yours will show the type of collection where water absorbs into the ground and becomes groundwater. Or you could also draw a river or lake that rain is falling into. Just remember to label your picture when you're done. So I need to write collection. Great job, everybody! Hopefully, you now have a better understanding of the vocabulary terms for the water cycle. The best part about this activity is that you now have a reference to look back on if you need help remembering what any of the words mean. See you guys next time!